There's absolute no way you can make this a plug and play conversion for anyone to be able to do. I'm not saying we're special people, I'm just saying we're stupid enough to dedicate 7 years of our life to try and make it happen. The moment Peter redone the adaptations when we got to Portugal, completely seamless and faultless. Like, it's just how it should have come out of the factory. It's a build for the people. So, obviously we needed the flywheel for the SMG because it had an issue due to a previous reputable Indy leaving debris in the bell housing post-clutch change. So we needed to do something. There was loads of options. We could have gone manual. I feel like this day and age, that's probably the easy way out. And I feel like if this engine was going into a different chassis, manual would probably be quite cool, with the cars being nimble, etc. It's really hard to try and describe to people that haven't driven these cars with said modifications, either on track or on the road, and get them to understand that a manual transmission for this, with the modifications that it has, is really not the right choice. That's just my opinion. It's not the right choice. First of all, you're going down to 6-speed, so then you're going to have to start playing with the rear diff and the final drives, because the 362 just wouldn't be accurate. It wouldn't be adequate. You'd probably want to go to like maybe a 385 or a 4.1 for it to keep the zing, whereas with a 7-speed DCT, because of the gear ratios in the DCT box, just like an E92, it mates perfect to the 362 final drive. So like with a DCT E92, one of the best mods anyone can do to these is install a 362 final drive, and it completely changes the car. So we knew that from a drivetrain perspective, we had the right combination with the 362 final drive to install the DCT and mate that to the engine. It's brought the car alive because of how much short the gearing is now. So if you think about the fact that these will do 205, 207 miles an hour from factory with the SMG gearbox, we're now limited to about 178 miles an hour because of the gear ratio difference in the DCT box compared to the SMG. So if you think about the fact that we've lost almost a 40 mile an hour top speed, we've gained that in acceleration. And not only have we gained it in acceleration, we've gained it with seamless upshifts at the same time. So that was the reason for the DCT to come into play in the first place when we tried to do this swap 5-6 years ago. And then the real main reason to go for it again instead of a ZF8, which we know you've got turbo Lamech ECUs these days, they do actually just work because automatic transmissions are much easier to calibrate, etc., was because of the people that told us we couldn't do it. And Peter asked me for one last attempt, and here we are. We have brand new lower arms and bushes and uniballs, all from BMW as a repair kit. The rear braking system is factory with Paget RS29s and some custom Hell braided stainless brake lines to the rear. The diff has some substantial cooling system going on. So we have a Mocal oil pump, which is temperature sensor driven to alive into a Mocal oil cooler that sits just in between the rear bumper, diffuser gap section that the car has, I guess. Up front we have custom E92 M3 lower control arms, E92 M3 KMP front control arm uniballs. On a Porsche you call them the coffin arm. I guess these are just the front control arms on the BMWs. AP Racing 9660s Pro 5000R calipers, mated with some ST45 brake pads and a BTCC disc. Rayland have made all of the brackets, bells and fixings for these. I think that's about it, bar the custom DCT cooler, which we still need to do some revisions on. Then the Intraxes, which is kind of, the whole car comes to life because of the suspension. So this was obviously a build for the people. We had the yellow speeds from about 4 years ago sitting in a box. So I figured, no time like the present, let's use these. They just didn't work. Again, how we like the cars to ride in terms of ride height and then ride quality, they just weren't good enough for the job. So then, because of us not having much time available, it was easier to go to the race car and steal the nitrons off of that. They also didn't work, but the reverse didn't work. Now these were too low. The reason why they were too low is because the race car has a silhouette which is 120 mil lower than a road car. So naturally the shocks were around 100 mil lower than what they should have been. So at maximum height that those shocks could go on the back, with no helper or tender spring, and with the piston essentially all the way up, this car was sitting at what would have been or should have been the lowest ride height we wanted. So they just didn't work, because the moment we had any shock travel, we were then hitting arches and cutting tires, or hitting, it was just a mess. So with the track day approaching, I decided that whether the suspension would be here or not in time, I was going to order the Intrax. We have a pretty good relationship with Intrax. Numerous sets of suspension off them. Jake's got Intrax on his E92. I have Intrax on my M4s. I've got Intrax to go on my E46. So we've got a good relationship. They built my Intrax on my M4 with my own custom rear shock length as well. So I know that they're happy to design stuff how I want it instead of just off the shelf. So it took about 3 weeks of to-ing and fro-ing with Martin from MS on a shock travel, camber adjustment design, because these are 2K2 with a low speed compression and rebound adjustability. Obviously opted for the ARC, the anti-roll control canisters. We needed to put them somewhere. The M6 chassis is completely different to the E92. The E92, there's loads of room to push canisters through the top of the strut towers, where these have like no room at all. There was quite a lot of to and fro with design, and then hose lengths for the canisters, and then this and then that and whatnot. And eventually it all got ordered, it all got commissioned, and the shocks arrived, I think 1 week before the track day, which was the best thing I could have possibly done, was order them, because the car now sits as it should and it rides as it should, and we've got the control on the adjustment, my spring rates, my shock lengths, exactly what I wanted. We are fortunate to be very well connected within the BMW infrastructure of high-end engineers. Let's go for that. I doubt that most people even know how to do the easy part, which is the mechanical components. And then finding somehow someone that can embed the DCT aspect of the transmission onto the factory ECU, that's another challenge. If you have that ability, then working through the challenge of it's still not working, but engineer number one tells you he's done everything right, and then engineer number two says you haven't, there's a problem somewhere. And then when you're in the middle of engineer number one and engineer number two with engineer number three, and you decide to go, let's take what he's saying, and then let's apply call it rat dog logic, and work backwards to a lot of problems, you start to solve a few issues, which then lead you down paths that aren't real. So you end up with ABS errors, airbag errors, DSC errors that are not ABS errors, airbag errors, or DSC errors. They are there because of the way the CAN communicates, and it's actually something else causing that problem. But the DMEs aren't telling you what the problem is. So the reason why I say we're fortunate to be well connected is because not only do we have all the adequate software and all the tools, and all, you know, we've got OEM software tools to be able to work with this, not Chinese or eBay £60 cables. We have genuine OEM tools. And even within, at times, the car still wasn't communicating. So speaking to other people, other coders, other diagnostic engineers, other software engineers, and getting their perspective on situations was ultimately what allowed us to make it work, because we were at a point where mechanically everything was working fine, but we'd lost stability control, traction control, ABS, airbags, and the servotronic steering. And it was, in the end, a very simple fix. But when you have all those faults all at the same time, and clearing the faults doesn't fix it, and replacing the parts doesn't fix it, you get to some dead ends. And a lot of people won't have a spare car to take modules out of like we do. Most people don't have multiple vehicles, so much for multiple vehicles of the same vehicle. And how do we not have a spare car to change clocks, CAS units, light modules? At one point we were considering fucking changing the whole DSC unit of the car for the spare one and for an E92 M3, even though they're the exact same Mark 60. They're literally the same units. We were still considering changing them over because of coding. All because we have the parts available. If people don't have these parts and they're going on eBay and they're buying a module because they think they need it, and the module arrives and they plug it in and the exact same problem and the code doesn't clear, it's quite easy to give up at that point. So how do we make it work? I'll be honest, I still don't actually know, but it's one of those builds. Some people, like, there'll be people that watch this that are legit car people, like they and engineers, and like they build things and they understand where I'm coming from. But it's one of those builds where there's a road and you've just got to walk the road all the way to the end, and then you get there and the result is existent. But then when you look back, you have no idea how you got there. You just know that it's just been problem solving after problem solving after problem solving. You got there, it works, everything's mint, everything can be calibrated again, we can talk to all the modules. But if you look back at it, there's been so much work done, we don't actually know what the steps are anymore. If we were to do this again, we would literally go through the same process. Apart from you remember a few bits here and there, but we'd have to go through the same process all over again. There's absolutely no way you can make this a plug and play conversion for anyone to be able to do. We talked about it. We liked the idea of it because I'm a massive fan of these cars, and this gearbox, you've been in the car, Peter's been in the car, Ned drove the car for hours. But anyone that's actually been in the car since we've gone to the trip now and experienced it understands what this is and why we've done what we've done, and it makes sense. So I'd love for other people to experience it, but from someone that's attempted to do it 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, we have the resource, we've got the people, we've got the tools, we've got the gear. It's still a terrible conversion to do. To do it the way that we've done, Someone wants to buy a Max ECU and spend 2 years calibrating it themselves, road tuning with their laptop, and they enjoy doing that, and they're trying to optimize it well, and they don't want to use the park function like we have, and they don't want to have a hill start like we do, and all of that stuff, then sure, it can actually be done, I'm led to believe, relatively easily. But to do it like factory, no. I'm not saying we're special people, I'm just saying we're stupid enough to dedicate 7 years of our life to try and make it happen. So there's two sides to this. I'm still seeking for perfection when it comes to drivability. You mentioned the real world. I think I've been brought back into the real world a little bit last weekend when we were in Portugal, because the real world is actually not what I'm trying to achieve. After spending time in Bodge's E92, after spending time in Jake's E92, I realised that these gearboxes are actually quite tractor-like. They're a great DCT gearbox, but we can't forget that they were released at the end of 2007, almost 20 years ago. And at the time they were great, but I'm trying to compare drivability and usability from one of these to what I've been used to for the last 3, 4 years, 5 years of my life, which is the F chassis gearboxes. And although they are BMW M7 speed DCT, they're not the same gearbox. These are Gen 1s, the other cars have Gen 2s. So the 5 M4s that I've owned, the M6 F chassis, the M5's F chassis that I've owned, the refinement and the speed and just generally the way that those gearboxes operate is much, much, much smoother than these, even with the GTS tune. So a GTS tune on an F chassis compared to a GTS tune on these, it's night and day. So what's it like in the real world? I wanted it to be better, but I think that's just me. It didn't give us a single problem in 2,000 miles. It changes when you need it to change. It downshifts when you need it to downshift. It hill starts. It has a park function. Don't get me wrong, we had teeth-in issues. We forgot to redo adaptations after I serviced the whole gearbox, obviously fresh oil filters, etc. The gearbox needed adaptations doing. It was a little bit clunky than what I wanted it to be. The moment Peter redone the adaptations when we got to Portugal, completely seamless and faultless. Like it's just how it should have come out of the factory. So in the real world, it's wicked. I think I've made the car not as good as it should be because of the rack stops that I've got, because of the steering, the wheels, the tyres, the rubbing. But the guys will see when we release the video, pulling on a M2 competition with a CS tune, and mainly the reason behind it is because I'm just pulling a paddle and it's a complete seamless upshift, and that M2 is a manual car. You just see the moment that M2 goes for a gear change, just putting car lamps on it. The fuel economy, I don't particularly care, but someone's going to ask. The fuel economy is now terrible because of the gear ratios. It is shocking. To sit at, let's call it the speed limit in mainland Europe, 80 miles an hour, 130 kilometers an hour, I think you're upwards of 3,000 RPM, 3.2, something like that. So it's not favourable on fuel economy. Didn't build it for that. But it's just, it's mega. As a package, it's wicked. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. With all of the modifications that have been done to the car, a lot of engineering hasn't been done from factory for this car to have this gearbox installed. An E92, as an example, has, even from factory, it has a plate-to-plate heat exchanger above the gearbox. So that's so that the temperature gets actually up to temperature quicker. But it's also to modulate thermostatic temperatures, because one of the valves for the oil cooler is thermostatic, right? So it's for town driving and all that nonsense. And then if you want to use it on track or take it on track, a factory E92 M3 has a nice little DCT cooler on the front right-hand side. They still do get hot, which is why people replace them with DO88 coolers. You know, other brands are available, but people seem to go for that one mainly. But you still need more volume of oil to help keep temperatures low, and a better radiator essentially to cool the fluid down quicker. With that being said, the lines and the routing and the pipework and etc., all of that stays stock. All you change on a 92 is literally the cooler itself. None of that exists on the V10. The SMG actually had its cooler underneath the gearbox, which was fed by 2 NACA ducts on the under tray. And the real reason behind that is because the V10 has got such large cats on the manifolds, literally just underneath where the firewall meets, that there is no routing whatsoever for pipework to run a cooler at the front of the car. So where BMW mounted it was just underneath the gearbox, 2 NACA ducts, happy days. And it kept the SMG cool enough. I have quite possibly one of the largest oil coolers I could find and fit at the front of the car for the gearbox. Custom adapter onto the side of the box. No thermostats, just keep it cold. The biggest problem I'm having at the minute is those cats. So there's no way to route these pipes to the front of the car for the cooler. So there's shields around the cats that we've made, and the oil lines that come out the gearbox are fully fire sleeved, protected, and also got shields, heat shields around them. But the cats are still generating so much heat that after 3-4 laps on track at wide open throttle, the gearbox oil starts to get too hot, and then the gearbox goes into something called soft limp. So in the whole drive down to the track and to Portugal, we have no issues whatsoever. You do a couple of pulls here and there, but it's no real reason to generate that much heat in the exhaust system. But when you're on track and you're downshifting, you're constant, you're on pull, you're wide open throttle, you're up in the revs, I believe the cats can get up to 800 to 900 degrees C. So if you imagine you've got these huge cats on the side of the engine, just right by the sump of the gearbox, and you've got the lines going right above them, soft limp on these gearboxes, I believe, is just over 129 degrees C. We were getting the fluid to around 134, 137. So it was giving us a soft limp. And what a soft limp is when you go to pull the paddle for an upshift, it doesn't give you the gear instantly. So then that way it doesn't slip the clutches, it doesn't damage it. So the stints we were managing were at the best 2.5, 3 to 4 laps a go. Was having to then come in, let the gearbox cool down, and then go back out again 20 minutes, half an hour later. Quite proud of what we've built, given the time scales, the new suspension, the completely untested suspension arms, the untested everything basically on this car. The only issue we had was that we couldn't keep the gearbox cold enough at a track day. We've got some solutions coming up. We're going to rectify the problem, try again, and see if we can keep the gearbox cold. If we can't, we actually have quite a lot of ideas on how to do it. So we'll go one by one, stage at a time, and make it usable. As far as a road car is concerned, you'll never overheat it. On track, obviously, especially Portimao, it's an aggressive track. It's not a track that you can just flow. It's an aggressive track. So yeah, we were getting the gearbox beyond optimal temperature, as you will see on the footage. It does it with no stress.
No, yeah.
It's a build for the people.
Yeah.
I tried to do like a dispatches thing there, you know, like try and 60 minutes with a M6 dealer. Is that good?